a while.
Aaron, did the screen change over there? If you turn on the video now, the Zoom video, turn it on. There we go.
Oh, thank you. I thought I did that. One more time for emphasis. This is Charlie Gadzik, Chair of the Newcastle Planning Commission, calling the meeting to order on January 25th, 2023. City Clerk White, would you call the roll, please?
Okay, Commissioner Kennard.
Present.
Commissioner Marsh.
Here.
Commissioner Quigg.
Here.
Commissioner Dent.
Here. Here.
Commissioner Van Atta.
Here.
That's 7 present and accounted for. Oh, Chair Gadzik.
Present. Would you all join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Are there any changes to the agenda? I'm looking around. I'm seeing no heads nodding yes, so we will consider the agenda approved. The minutes of December 28th, were submitted. Are there any amendments or changes to the minutes of December 28th? None, so we will consider those to be approved. That brings us to the public comment period of tonight. There is no one here at City Hall present for public comment. Senior Planner Fitzgibbons, is there anybody online that could be waiting to comment?
There is not.
Okay, we'll then close the public comment period and give the commissioners an opportunity to comment. And I will just open the floor to any commissioner who would like to comment. Go ahead. You can tell this is not the U.S. Senate. Okay, so we'll move from that to the reports. The commission chair, much like his fellow commissioners, has no report. Which takes us to the community development director. Director Hoffman, would you like to make any comments?
Thank you, Chair. Mark Hoffman, Community Development Director. Short report tonight, update on the contract comp plan status. In December, the City Council selected SCJ Alliance. We've been working with them on a scope and timeline, negotiating a contract through the city manager. By this Friday, I'm happy to announce we will have that draft. Next week, it's City Council packet review week, and we anticipate that contract going to City Council February 7th. If all goes well that night, February 8th, our comp plan update process begins in earnest with SCJ Alliance. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. That brings us to the general business for tonight. As there are no public hearings, tonight we will basically have a briefing and discussion about the housing element of the comprehensive plan by Director Hoffman and Senior Planner Fitzgibbons. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I have a question for the clerk before we get started. Do I need to share this on Zoom? No, okay. Okay. So tonight, you were not expected to have read our comprehensive plan before we get started tonight. It's really just, like I said in the packet, it's an overview. SCJ will have so much energy and knowledge on this subject that we just wanted to get everybody started and get the conversation rolling. So tonight we'll go over just briefly where the comprehensive plan comes from, what the goals of the housing element are. We're going to do some numbers. We're going to look at population counts and other data. We'll start looking at the adopted House Bill 1220, which the outline was in your packet. The Mid-Level Housing Grant, I'm just going to go over that briefly to tell you kind of what's going on with that. And then we have this proposed House Bill 1110, which is an interesting one. And then we'll get into discussion from there. Please feel free to interrupt me if something isn't clear or you want to ask questions on something, but we'll hold the major discussion for the end. Comprehensive plan is required per the Growth Management Act, and you may already be aware of this. Counties with populations of 50,000 or more are required to have these comprehensive plans, and they have there's actually 6 required elements if they meet certain criteria, but we don't have the rural element in our own. But we also have a metropolitan planning organization, Puget Sound Regional Commission, which also looks at our comprehensive plan and has to sign off on it. When you're looking at consistency, you have to have consistency across the RCWs and WACs, of course, PSRC, then King County, countywide planning policies are set. And those are the ones that we will really be looking at, trying to meet those goals. And then, of course, we have our own comprehensive plan. Newcastle's 2035 comprehensive plan, which I believe everybody has a copy of already, these are the elements that are in it now: land use, housing, transportation, parks and trails. I would anticipate that this year it's going to stay largely the same, but we will see. So with housing, the goals per the RCWs is one, to encourage the availability of affordable housing to all economic segments of the population, to promote a variety of residential densities and housing types, and encourage preservation of the existing housing stock. So as I go through these slides, if you kind of think of how does Newcastle fit into these different goals and policies, that might help the discussion. So why are we talking about housing now? Why didn't we start with land use? And part of it is just the requirements have changed, and it's sort of the beefiest, most interesting part that we'll be talking about. And then also our schedule. I'll be talking about the Middle Housing Grant in a few minutes here, but the Middle Housing Grant is due in June of this year, unlike the comp plan, which is due the end of 2024. So we're getting started on housing really fast. So when we look at the numbers, I don't like to read off screens, but I'm going to do that for this one. So this is per the regional needs assessment from PRSC. That's Kitsap, Snohomish, King, and Pierce counties. So housing production lagged population growth by 40 to 50,000 units between 2010 and 2020. The region needs 810,000 new housing units by 2050. This may be obvious, but housing prices increases have outpaced income increases. And rent increased 53%, and housing values increased by 67% between 2011 and 2019. Our region has limited middle density ownership options, such as townhomes, triplexes, fourplexes, which honestly, some sort of attached unit is going to be really the future of first home ownership in the region. I don't know about anybody here, but my first unit was a condo, and that's going to be the norm. And then homes that are suitable for families to rent are also in demand. We're looking at an increasing disparity between access to housing between people of color and people who are white. And then we're also looking at a large population of people who are traveling between different counties in the region, living further out for less expensive housing, which of course affects health. If anyone's had the hour-long commute plus, you know how that can affect your health and your transportation costs. Looking at King County, there are 39 cities in King County, and we're looking to accommodate 660,000 more people and 490,000 more jobs by 2044. So their plan and our plan go out through the time range of 2044. In your packet, you saw the reference to affordable housing. According to King County, we're going to need 15% of our housing supply in the region to be 15% extremely low income, very low income at 15%, and low income at 19% of the housing supply. When you look at this table, so this is just a screen capture out of the planning policies, you can see here the housing units that exist as of 2019. So 5% the housing is in this 30% category or extremely low income. We've got 13%, which is just about hitting that goal for the low income, and then for, that's very low income, I'm sorry. And then for low income, we're at 19%. So when you look here, so this is additional houses to meet existing conditions, and then again, or then here is for the growth targets. You can see that this very low income or extremely low income is where we're looking for additional housing units in the region. So Newcastle has been categorized as a high capacity transit communities, which surprised a lot of people. I believe this is because of the bus rapid transit stop that's going to be located off of 405 where they're doing all the work off of Northeast 44th. There's going to be a bus rapid transit stop right there between the lanes. And so Newcastle, these numbers, this is 1,480 new household or units by 2044, and we'll be looking to take on about 500 more jobs in the city. And then these are the other cities, just so you know, these are the other cities in the region that have been identified as high-capacity transit communities. So of all the units in Newcastle, what this is showing is that, for example, in the extremely low income range, 1% of all units meet the rent price or the my goodness, 1 to 30% AMI, and that's 60 units of our total units. The percent of households in that category is 6%, or 250 households. So you can see that people are probably very cost burdened, considering the number of units that we have that meet this category of income versus the reality of number of households. So then going through this, again, these high capacity transit communities. And Newcastle, here's that 60 count for extremely low income, 1%. This is the very low income at 115, low income and moderate. This is from the King County Affordable Housing Dashboard, and I don't expect anybody to memorize this because I certainly have not. But I would encourage you to take a look at it and play around with it. You can look at all these different cities' data if you like to look at these kinds of things. You can see here that, again, the number of units, but there are only 12 income restricted units that are actually subsidized in the city, and 3 in the 0 to 30% AMI, or the extremely low income. So while we have units in the city that have rents or mortgages that are low enough to keep people in these income categories from being cost burdened, these are the only ones that are deed restricted and subsidized. You can see here also, you can see the number of people that are severely cost burdened, where they're spending more than 50% of their income on housing, or cost burden, which is 30% or more of their income on housing. Interesting too is that these pages show what Newcastle is already doing to address this. We have density bonuses, inclusionary zoning. We outright allow accessory dwelling units. What they don't show is what kind of processes people have to go through in order to develop these kinds of houses. And so for PUDs, low-rise multifamily, mixed use, townhomes in a residential zone, they have to go through a public hearing. And for a PUD, you have to also go through a council decision in Newcastle right now. I just wanted to note, take a breath. Staff are learning with you, and so SCJ may come in here and completely prove me wrong. Oh, or not. But I'm pulling this data from the best sources I can. So quick comparison, moving on to the housing element and the middle housing grant. Housing element is obviously a state requirement. It has a broader focus. It'll have policies and goals in it. It has that due date of the end of 2024, which I mentioned. And then it can lead to zoning amendments. Whereas this middle housing grant is really focused on the opportunity to put middle housing. Is there an opportunity, I think is the question, to have middle housing in these different jurisdictions who applied for and got the grants, which we are one of. It's focused on the House Bill 1220 changes. Again, it's due in June. And the the aim is to have 30% of all of our single-family zoned units. Could those somehow incorporate more middle housing? And so as this comes through, we may be having some more conversations. House Bill 1220 strengthened the housing goal. You may have already seen this in your packet, but it was from encouraging affordable housing, which is what the RCWs have said since 1990, to plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all income levels. So it's much stronger language. Like they're like cities, you must do this, or regions, counties, you must do this. And when we talk about middle housing, are commissioners familiar with middle housing? Have you heard the term? Yes, some no, some. Okay. What it does is it bridges the gap between detached single-family homes and the mid and high-rise. So it's literally duplex, triplex, these middle density types of homes. And one theory is that they get denser and denser as you get towards like a city center. As I mentioned before, cottage housing and ADUs are outright allowed. That was on that data sheet. Cottage housing are these courtyard type houses. They tend to be smaller, maybe up to 1,500 square feet. They're around a central courtyard. ADUs, as you may be familiar, can be detached or attached. Then there are also options for townhomes, duplexes. This is actually a stacked triplex. They're not all this way, but I just wanted to show some different examples of different types of housing that fits into these different housing types. And then this is, I believe, a 4- or 5-plex here, probably in Southern California somewhere. Proposed House Bill 1110 would allow 4 units per lot in all cities with population of 6,000 plus, and that's per residentially zoned lot. Then you would also be allowed 6 units if you add in 2 deed-restricted affordable housing units and parcels within a half mile of a major transit stop, which Newcastle will have some with that bus rapid transit stop. And then there are adoption of anti-displacement and middle housing policies, which we're already looking at with this comp plan, and middle housing parking incentives. So when you look at our zoning map, all of this yellow would then be allowed to have 4 units per lot.
Hey, Aaron,
Mm-hmm.
when you say lot, is there like a minimum lot size? Or is it 4 per 1,000 square foot lot? Like whatever you can fit?
From what I've seen, there is not a minimum lot size. Yeah. I mean, in the city, we currently have minimum lot sizes, but they haven't rectified density and unit count yet.
Aaron, is there a requirement for parking or no requirement?
So so if you're within this is a half-mile radius-ish from the bus rapid transit stop location. If you were in this location or in that radius, and then if you had middle housing, you would not be required, per the language as it's proposed now, to have off-street parking. Yeah.
Okay.
And for the rest of the city, it would be based on, is it middle housing? If it is middle housing, then I believe, depending on where it is, it's either, I think it would be 1 off-street parking spot would be the requirement.
So the bus line that runs down Coal Creek is not considered major transit stop?
Not the way the language is currently drafted. The headways are 30 minutes. It's 30 minutes apart on Coal Creek Parkway right now during peak times. And I think it has to be 15 to 20 minutes. So,
There's one on Coal Creek, doesn't like the 111 and the 114 go through, like 124th? Those aren't Coal Creek buses, the main ones that go to Seattle and Bellevue?
And I will look this up, because what I saw was only the one line, I think it's a 280. But I will look that up, thank you. And then lastly, I just wanted to show this. Take it a little bit with a grain of salt, because so much of Newcastle is already subdivided and platted. A lot of these are newer, especially like around Olympus. We have some new that aren't even shaded in here. We have Heemstra going in. There's a lot of green space with the golf course and May Creek Park. That it would really take redevelopment of lots, either to have these four units per lot, or, you'd have to have lots that are actually conducive to it, and we have a lot of critical areas left in the city, so what this would actually look like in Newcastle is somewhat of a question. All that said, I'm gonna let y'all talk now. Thank you, Chair Jacek.
Under the proposed law, if it were to pass, what are the penalties for not complying?
Without knowing the specifics, the summary penalty is that there's a provision in the draft bill that creates model ordinances. If a city didn't adopt an ordinance on its own compliant with the House bill, those model ordinances go into effect automatically at some point. I believe it's 2 years, might be a year and a half. But I also stress this is the beginning of the session, and bills make their way through and change drastically. So,
And those model ordinances don't have to be drafted till a couple of years after the bill is passed, as I understand it.
there's a section in there requiring Commerce to draft those model ordinances. They do not exist yet. Ordinances for cities like Spokane, Port Townsend exist, but not to this extent. So if the bill passes, it takes effect in 90 days, and then that clock would start for Commerce to circulate, get comment, create the model ordinance, then they take effect. And if a city did nothing, as it's currently written, we would lose control of that segment of our ordinance.
I have a question. I'm not sure I totally understand, but is it because Newcastle is in the high capacity transition category group triggered we need to have this housing elements? Or one thing I guess I saw the some other cities listed there. Quite honestly, my first reaction is I'm surprised Newcastle is within that group of cities. I will consider like neighborhood of Barrowville, Issaquah, none of those are on that. I guess, what's is that because we fit in this high capacity transit community triggered all that, and why we are there, I guess?
The housing element under RCW applies to every community in the state. You must have a housing element. When they are looking at this housing policy the last few sessions, and especially this year, it's the contents of those housing elements as it applies to your character of city. So you have to have a housing element, you have to have certain things in there, and they're slowly trying to create policy where density and affordable housing is in close proximity to job centers and urban areas, and especially around transit, light rail, ferries, bus stops. So in Olympia, they're trying to create policies that encourage or mandate affordable housing. Whereas RCW and GMA requires every city to have a housing element and provide housing for different groups, and they're trying to strengthen that too. So no matter what we do this spring, we will relook and possibly revise our housing element. House Bill 1110 is one aspect of that that mandates a certain set of policies for affordable housing. The categories come in with the regional growth strategy. So that's in Vision 2050 at PSRC, but is implemented through the King County countywide planning policies. In there, it creates the different categories. That's why you don't see North Bend, Snoqualmie in here. Metro Transit barely serves those areas. Some aren't even in the contiguous urban growth area. But as a category, if you have transit of some sort compared to those outlying areas, you're in this group. For Bainbridge Island, for instance, it's got the highway connecting to Poulsbo and a ferry terminal. And that's it. So they get lumped into this category. Where it applies is the number or the share or proportion of that regional growth that that category is supposed to accept between now and 2044. They're in the large city. Yeah, there's different gradients. You have Seattle, Bellevue, that other kind of upper range, high capacity transit, and then the level just below that, non-contiguous urban growth area, Snoqualmie, North Bend, things like that.
So then it's essentially all the towns around like 405, I-5, all of us are in this together. So it sounds like Bellevue, Kirkland, Woodinville. I'm just imagining myself driving to Canada, right? It's everything in King County is that right? Like I don't see Kirkland, but probably because it's a bigger city than us, or okay.
Yeah, they're all, everyone's listed. Everyone's in a category. If there's any benefit to Newcastle, it's that we barely have mass transit. And so we're in a capable situation without actually having a light rail. We're not Tacoma. We're not Bellevue. Most of the impact is designed to be absorbed by those communities, very urban. And then as you work your way down, there is mass transit here in comparison to Monroe or east of the Cascades. And so the policy has to apply statewide, but we're in a different category. If there were no bus services here, we wouldn't be in this high capacity transit. So don't be alarmed by the word high. It's who you compare it to. Compared to North Bend, we have a higher transit capacity. Compared to Bellevue, we have next to none.
My sense is that the requirement for no parking in a fourplex next to a single-family home is going to be extremely controversial in Newcastle, and so a really good public education process is going to be essential to let people know what's happening and when, so that when it does happen, people have already kind of understood it, had their say, and hopefully can accept it.
Was the parking piece just in that radius from the bus stop?
As I understand it, yes.
Okay.
Of course, if there does turn out to be something that meets the timing for the buses along Coal Creek, it would also be up in our downtown area, which already is dense. So, Commissioner Marsh?
Well, I'm looking at the packet materials for today, and there was the House Bill summary, and where it talks about the middle housing requirements, there are some bullet points, and it does talk about, it does say here, I'm reading from the packet, city subject to the middle housing requirements may not require more than one off-street parking space per lot as a condition of permitting development of middle housing on lots smaller than 6,000 square feet, and may not require more than two off-street parking spaces per lot as a condition of permitting development of middle housing on lots greater than 6,000 square feet. So I don't know if that's, I mean, I recognize this is all a bill that's not been passed and it's just in for debate at this point. But I'm curious if, am I reading that wrong, or would that not be, if somebody built a fourplex on a 7,000-foot lot up in China Falls, I assume that they would only require 2 off-street. We could not, as a city, require more than 2 off-street parking spots for the lot. Am I reading that right?
You're reading it right, and the word is require. They could certainly voluntarily provide. Nothing prohibits it, but it could not be required by a city.
So it's just that bullet above it where it says may not require off-street parking as a condition of permitting development of middle housing within the half mile of the major transit stop. So that would just be in this overlay here.
I guess I do question if a developer has the opportunity to put 4, luxury, big-sized units on a lot in the middle of a neighborhood and only be required to put 2 parking spots there by the city. It's one thing to have that be down here by the transit stop, but if that's at the other end of town where there's no bus line available, it seems to me that that kind of works counter to what is intended to be accomplished here, right? Because you've got multifamily housing that's not within a reasonable distance from transit, and you don't have parking for cars, so people don't have vehicles. I guess I'm just confused how that is intended to kind of support the overall intent here of making housing available to people who are lower income.
Well, and they'd still have vehicles, right? They probably have cars, just be parked in the street. That's, I mean, in our HOA, that's like that's the most frequent thing we hear is, this car, these need to be parked in their garage, they got all this junk in their garage, they should be parking in this, so we hear that all the time. Like Brian said, this is gonna be a doozy.
I can double check. When I read this before, I was thinking per unit, but these are saying per lot instead of per unit. So parking, yeah.
I mean, this is the way people in big cities live right now.
Yeah.
Some places, like my daughter lives in Chicago, sometimes she has to park her car 2 blocks away because every single space on the street is full, and there's no off-street parking. And there's lots of middle housing.
And what you've just expressed in those last couple of minutes mirrors exactly the comment that is in Olympia right now. There's been an initial public hearing with the Senate today and last week in the House. And so I've been purposefully not focused on the bulleted points and the individual parking language and so forth. Is that last year, as you may be aware, the 2 bills never made it out of committee. This one is more detailed, more forceful, and though it has more detailed bullet points, such as parking, we don't know how it's going to mature or evolve. So I've been staying away from that. Right now, I would say be aware of it, and the comments that you've expressed go in the category of one size fits all. As they implement this policy, their intent is that it applies to every city. But we all know every city has a different character. Some are very similar to New York, where you can get by without a vehicle, and may be appropriate that you don't have a parking space. Some are very suburban and have a Zillow walkability score of 0. That policy would apply to that situation, but it makes no sense. You're not going to extend mass transit to every situation in every city that is zoned residential. So as we track this through the legislature and as we implement housing policy for Newcastle, the importance of tonight is to be aware of the House bill, to be aware of the middle housing grant in the middle of this comprehensive plan update, and start a conversation about what's appropriate for Newcastle and see where we're at as far as this bill in April, and see if it progresses. But the conversation's important, whether it's community character, built environment, availability of transit, it starts to melt its way into all those policy discussions that we're going to have over 2 years.
Aaron referred to a June deadline for the middle housing grant. What does Newcastle have to do to meet that deadline? What is the deliverable that Newcastle has to deliver?
So there's a few parts to it, but one is just research on our existing development code and looking at anti-displacement measures. Another is reaching out and working with community-based organizations, proposed ordinances for incorporating more middle housing into the city of Newcastle on 30% of our single-family lots. So that could be, we're going to outright allow duplexes in 30% of our lots or something. We're not that specific yet, we're not there. And obviously, Planning Commission would be involved in any sort of actual ordinances.
And one thing to note, the deliverables due by June for the grant are achievable. We tried to incorporate as many of them as possible into this contract for the comprehensive plan amendment. Unfortunately, some of that work is in the draft right now. The outreach, the displacement, the early components. One element that we weren't able to get in there because of the timelines is the grant requires that you have draft, after you analyze what your existing codes are, draft possibly implementable ordinances. We can achieve that because there are 6, 7 examples already in the state. We will get there, achieve the deliverable, receive funding under that grant and complete it, but that there is no obligation to pass those ordinances. It's a community discussion after you analyze. So we could achieve that grant. The larger conversation for the comprehensive plan that you'll have this year and incorporate what you must and what you want is 2 years.
Mark, the best thing I heard all night was you saying 6 or 7 cities have already done this. Did I just hear you correctly? So why can't, let's just look, I mean, I'm curious to see, what did they do? What did they do? What did they do? If I don't have to invent the wheel, I'll copy somebody else's wheel, right? And how did they do it? And, you know, how was their outreach? And I feel, I kind of got the sense we're starting from scratch and there's a new bill out of Olympia and we got to figure out what to do with it. But what I'm hearing is, oh no, there's a half a dozen cities that have already pulled this off. So I'd love to, if there's a list of those cities there, and I'd love to educate myself.
Absolutely, and the more reading you do on this, the better. This is a legislative item statewide, so feel free to explore. The short list I would characterize as cities that took the initiative to address their individual affordable housing problems. Last year, we were not sure which bill would emerge or if it would emerge, but the writing was on the wall. The need is clear. At a high level, everyone agrees, but when you get down to the detail, whether it's local control, it varies. The cities that took that and were proactive are Spokane Valley, Pasco, Port Townsend, Sequim. Am I getting closer to here? Kenmore. And this effort in our sub-region is less representative.
Yeah, if I may, Chair Gatzek. Director Hoffman, is there anything relevant to the current measures that we've been talking about pertaining to zoning for jobs? Or is it strictly focused on residential zoning? In other words, or are we talking about mixed use and access to commercial, which obviously is very important if you're not going to have a car and rely on transit?
That gets at the highest level. The reason for all this work is the issues that the state and the metropolitan areas are facing. The hour-long commute, the 2-hour commute, that jobs housing balance is achievable. You can't keep building highways. You can't keep pouring money into highway infrastructure for sprawl and so forth. That's why you have the Growth Management Act. the main purpose of this is get people out of cars, put housing where the jobs are. You don't have to keep building highways. The train or the light rail and so forth helps, but we're at that point where density becomes the issue. Put it where it exists, and you don't need to drive from Marysville to Seattle as much as you do now. If you project out to 2044 or 2050, the problem gets significantly worse. So these efforts are to do that. Jobs, housing balance, put the housing where the jobs are. The easiest way is to take advantage of mass transit. That's where we get lumped in because of our proximity.
Did I also see a slide in one of the earlier slides that Newcastle would need to add 500 jobs by 2044?
You did, and that's the current breakout from the county's policy document. But I think those are also shared a little bit across border lines, because they know, I mean, they put 500 in Newcastle, but what if, let's say Renton, East Renton here gets, 7,000 jobs when they're only looked at having 3,500. I think there's some give and take from what I read.
And their targets, the last round of comprehensive plan, we got into a long unresolved discussion with PSRC about floors, ceilings, targets, and that we have no control over what gets built where. The countywide planning policies incorporate the regional growth strategy. That focuses growth in the main metropolitan areas. But the different categories have a share in that, because that's also urban growth area. The primary policy is they don't want the rural areas unincorporated in the county to accept the growth. So they come up with the regional growth strategy and the growth targets that you're supposed to plan for. It's both housing and jobs, because of what the city clerk mentioned. You want the jobs and housing to be related so that we're not all driving across the state. In those sub-regions, you have the different categories that we talked about. And while the jobs and housing don't work well as a balance for any individual city, as a group, they need to perform well. So, for instance, I'll come up with a Newcastle analogy. If 100% of our residents that live here work somewhere else, they're in their cars every day. If 100% of the workers that work here live somewhere else, they have to get in their cars every day. But the housing jobs balance ratio would be perfect, right? So it breaks down for communities, but we need to accept growth. We need to participate in the growth target setting. We need to incorporate policies for that, but we have no control over where people live and work. We have the benefit that Newcastle is small and relatively close to job centers, Amazon, Microsoft. So the burden is not big, but we need to participate. So over a 20-year period, 500 jobs I'll characterize as accommodating and planning for the natural growth of the city. You're not shutting the door and going to zero, like Sammamish was stating that they would like to do with housing and take zero. But also, you're not shutting the door to jobs. But it's the natural occurring growth that represents that 500 over that time period.
I guess I have a couple of thoughts. I think first of all, recognizing that House Bill 1110 is just that, it's a bill and it's not the law. I mean, I think trying to keep that in mind. I do think it's interesting. I did look a little bit around on this today, and things like the Washington Association of Cities and the position, and City of Newcastle's a member, there were definitely quotes there that I think raised some concern, which is embedded in some of what I heard you say, about the tension between local control for zoning and something like House Bill 1110. I think I am very much on board with, I think we do need to be planful here, and this is part of our process. And I think thinking about housing and density and jobs and zoning appropriately is important, and I know that's going to be part of what we do here. I guess I'm curious, does the city of Newcastle, will it take a position on House Bill 1110 in terms of this is an appropriate thing to cede to the state, or to have the state dictate to the city of Newcastle with potentially unintended consequences? Or is this something that the city of Newcastle doesn't, not us, but the city council decides this isn't appropriate and we want to take a position on that? I think other cities are, at least considering that from some of the media that I've read, and I'm curious if that's in the cards for our city or not.
Well, I'll start with the purpose of tonight. The reason this is an agenda item is not to elicit that or answer that. It's to start that conversation about policy in the comprehensive plan, but be aware of what we have, where we need to go, and what's in the works. And it's early in the session. But early in the session gets to end of session really quick. And there will be opportunities for comment if this makes it out of committee specifically. We've had no direction to take a stance from the council at this point. We have not testified. We are monitoring it so that we can assist or talk specifically about provisions of the bill when that time comes, and that would be our current status. Depending on how we go from week to week, we are monitoring each and every step. We have a lobbyist. We have the city council aware. We now have you aware. Tonight's purpose is to start a community conversation that includes awareness of 1110 that may lead directly to what is a Newcastle consensus. Typically that comes from the city council, a majority of the city council, but individuals can express their opinions, but not speak for the city. So we'll see how that goes. I imagine as this progresses, cities will collaborate or will get direction to participate and comment one way or another once we know what that consensus is, but we're not quite at that point. I would offer it's a little soon. Any comment that we provide would probably be too specific at this point. So there's no danger in not commenting today. The danger would be not being aware and not watching this. But a moment may come where outreach to other cities, similar in nature, for instance, outreach to our elected representatives, our city council, and expressing Newcastle's point of view may be very important.
Chair Gatzek, if I may. City Clerk Paul White, this is not intended as an actually to the Community Development Director, but I would add to that local control is an item on the city's legislative agenda. And we do employ, we do have contract lobbyists working in Olympia advocating on that subject. So that is short of, as you said, testifying in front of a committee or something of this regard. If the question goes to the length of, to the degree of, will the city make a pronouncement like, adopting a resolution, opposing or promoting, certain legislation, that is a step that there are a number of limits on that legislatively that we would have to jump through several hoops if it were to come to that. But I didn't want the part about it being on our established legislative agenda with council approval and having people working on it in Olympia to be unmentioned.
And that's an important point. One step further is the degree, which kind of explains why it may be too early. You would find common agreement that affordable housing is an issue and should be a legislative priority. It's on our list. It's on the lobbyist list. And people are representing us in Olympia for that level of policy. But when you drill down into specifics of a bill and comments on it, it's premature for that. But at an upper level, it is on the legislative priority list for Newcastle.
So thank you both. That was for me, very helpful additional context. And to be clear, I'm not suggesting that the city do any of that. I just was curious if there was any thought about that. For me, it underscores the importance of, I think, a point that you are making, which is, you can be out in front of this or you can be behind this, right? And I guess I'm curious, if we want to be out in front of this now, so what are our next steps? I know that we are going to be getting public feedback. We're going to be going through that process. How do we start to have a dialogue or a conversation here that helps us, consider what is required of us, what may be required of us is keeping that in mind as context, but really what's right for the city, right? What are the right areas to maybe reconsider how housing is viewed or how jobs are viewed?
My point of view, the purpose or the carry away of the conversation tonight, very important question. When we looked at material and did the agenda item, that came up. My fear was that we would get that question and be directed to us, which is natural. My reaction in discussion with Aaron was, that's great, let's turn it around so that we're asking you. We know that the conversation has to be had. It's a community conversation, it's legislative, it's important, it's timely. But it's that direction that I think we should switch. How can we assist you have that conversation? The tool that you have in front of you right now is the comprehensive plan, the housing element, awareness. We can bring factual information. We're watching the public hearings. We can inform you. But the danger of doing it the other way around is that we start looking like the electeds or the policymakers. And I think if the commission stays within your scope or range of the comprehensive plan, this is an item that you can look into and we can assist you in that conversation. The next tool that's physically available is the SCJ outreach. There are certain elements when you do the outreach and talk to stakeholders in February, you begin that conversation about what are your concerns. And I imagine at that point, this House Bill 1110 will not be a mystery. And you'll hear those comments that conversation will take place in a timely manner, not in May after it's mandated. So I see February as that, but I would offer, how can we assist you in talking about that issue?
Whether or not the legislature passes a law that says we have to accept middle housing to some degree, we're going to be looking at the housing element of the comprehensive plan to see whether the existing plan still fits where the community wants to be. And so a question I think that we can all be asking our friends and neighbors as we, over the next couple of months is, should we be making any changes in the allowable density to address the fact that housing is out of reach for our kids who want to live here, or for other people who need to live within a commutable distance of their jobs? Are you willing to support something that would change what the current density formula? Are you willing to have a duplex next door or a triplex next door? Because there may not be a state mandate, but if our community is open to that, that might be something that we would incorporate in a new comprehensive plan.
Yeah, another number that stood out to me was the 3 subsidized housing units for the extremely low income. That's not a lot, 3. And I think that, I'm still understanding what these, not 1110, which I understand is still, we're figuring out what's going to happen next, but is it the 1220 that says something about Newcastle planning for additional units in that category? whether 1110 passes or not, or changes, or?
I'll start. Um, This is sort of the little nugget that starts it all. Plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all income levels. So where are we on that? We need to understand, because missing middle housing isn't going to be necessarily affordable in the terms of AMI. It's going to possibly be more attainable type housing. So there's a couple ways to look at this. Our comprehensive plan for the last 20 years has said that we are going to meet affordable housing goals in the county. Do we want to actually, as a city, make changes that actually help implement different types of housing, more attainable housing? And Chair Gatzik was already getting to this. So it's getting those questions out to the community and doing this community outreach. We're just starting. So yeah.
Is that something that's not mandated by legislation? I mean, it's just this, it's instead of encouraged to plan for it? That's what it,
So House Bill 1220 was 2 years ago and passed, and we're required to implement it. It's not as strong as what was drafted last year and never made it out of committee. It's certainly not as strong as what's proposed this year. The bus keeps rolling. But in implementing 1220, the importance is, and the three that you notice is very important to that. If everyone for the last 30 years has recognized there's an affordable housing issue that needs to be addressed, the existing tools aren't apparently working under encourage affordable housing. The most absurd way that looks is you have a policy in your comp plan, you call it a housing element, and you say, we encourage the construction of affordable housing. In theory, you're meeting that. We're encouraging it. We're not facilitating it. We're not mandating it. But in order to address the reason, what you brought up, there's only 3 deed restricted of that category. There's 12 total. This is not working. We need to do more. Prices keep rising. We need better tools. House Bill 1220 took it 1 degree further and said, instead of just encourage, you should begin to plan for and accommodate. Very general words. Over the next 6 weeks, 7 weeks, there's going to be more public comment ability about what those words mean while we're working on the House Bill 1220 under that grant. And each city will be slightly different. In the most extreme, plan for and accommodate means that you'll provide water, sewer, CIP, and the full deal concurrency for those numbers that we have, 15%, 15%, 19%. But it's so general that you need to take a step forward under this adopted bill, under the words plan for and accommodate. You can no longer just have policies that say, hey, we want this. So it's that next degree. But it's not as mandated. The other extreme would be in the future in Washington, you go the California route, which says, this is the breakdown in this category, 15% of your housing shall be this level, 0 to 30, 15 shall be 30 to 50. It's not saying your housing inventory shall be that, but it's a step in that direction.
There's, in our own comprehensive plan, there are some places where it says we shall do something, and there's some places where it says we should do something. Though I interpret that to mean that shall means you must, and should means it's a good idea to do it, but you don't really have to do it. Is that what are the words that that the plan for and accommodate? Is that a should or a shall?
That's a great example. It's an incremental move from should toward shall, without saying shall. You're moving in that direction. And depending on where you sit in your perspective, it's either it doesn't work or it works. But the goal is to strengthen the tools available to provide more affordable housing. Encourage wasn't working, let's make it stronger. And they landed on plan for and accommodate, which requires more work.
But
it-
did they
it is
say
not
we
mandate.
shall plan for and accommodate, or do we should plan for and accommodate?
Shall,
Shall, okay.
yeah.
Well, like right now, the P8 is the city shall encourage innovative housing development. You know, such as planned unit developments and cottage housing that increases the range of housing types available. That's kind of the element you're talking about, I think.
Well, maintaining local control, that's a great example too. If we were looking at our comprehensive plan and in your work on behalf of the community, the fix was, let's turn some of these shoulds into shalls, then they're in our policy, and that would represent this shift. You're applying it to Newcastle. It's no longer shall, it's no longer should, or maybe, or possibly, or hey, let's look at it. It's that next degree. And the existing policies in the existing adopted comprehensive plan need to be strengthened in that manner, but it's up to you which shoulds are turned to shalls. Once you adopt that comprehensive plan, that's now the policy for this city.
So I have a question on this all income levels. Is that like local focus or it's county, state, meaning, say, should I think about Newcastle will accommodate housing towards, like medium housing is affordable towards medium income level to Newcastle people? And to think from that number, or this is all income, because Newcastle medium income is different than King County, right? So how should I think about this when we say accommodate housing affordable to all income levels? I mean, I think there's even a figure in the analysis, like a Newcastle median household income is 136,000 something, right? And it's kind of equivalent to, you think about that income affordability is like 780,000 housing, consider the mortgage or rent. Is that something it's actually related, or it's not? It's like all income, state, I don't know, I guess I would like to get some clarity there.
At the highest level, it's regional. So for us, it's the King County median, which is very high, 135, 140,000, depending on your family size. It's very high. It's very different than Pasco or the other areas. So it's sub-regional in that context. But the commonality statewide is that no matter who you are, what you do, whatever your income is, that we are providing housing for all the categories, regardless of income, so that you're generally spending about a third of your income on housing or less. That fixes or starts to fix the affordable housing issue. Now, each city will be different. In our comprehensive plan, we'll have that chart as it pertains to the King County median income and how it relates to the residents or the future residents in the city of Newcastle. And it goes up over time. But it's tailored for Newcastle within the context of King County and then broken down by income level. The difficulty is, so you do that calculation, then you look out 20 or 30 years and you see 1 million people coming. And you do that same demographic analysis, and that's where you come up with the number of estimated housing and type that's needed for the different categories that we've talked about, and then drill it down to Newcastle in our regional share.
sorry, I think there's an earlier figure, it's like by 500 jobs, and then it also have like 1,480 households, say 1,500. So I don't know, it's not really balanced. Is it like a 3 household for 1 job? Or I guess either you have a very high job or you have a very, very low affordable household. That's sort of, I guess, the balance here, right? It's just, I don't know, especially those 2 numbers in the same sentence. I mean, I don't know how you guys getting. What I'm getting is this, the jobs, it's kind of easy to reach. The household,
I think they're probably looking at job centers and using some of that in their analyses. Newcastle is not a major job center now, and I don't think it's anticipated to be one. I mean, we'd have to build a lot more commercial area, and we're not going to build industrial here. So what kind of jobs do we offer? Plus, where can we have jobs? So I think that's really what they're looking at.
And it's not a guess. And it's hard to explain this next issue. There's so many timelines going on, and everything is going on at the same time, out of order. The way Growth Management Act is based for these numbers is what's used to be called the buildable lands or capacity study. Every city is required to do one. Last round and this round, unfortunately, you had to do it before you did your planning. So you come up with buildable lands and capacity based on your zoning, existing land uses, and different types of available land. Once you have your capacity study, you know what it could take to serve that, water, sewer, and so forth. But you never exceed your capacity because of concurrency. But that study exists, and in theory, if you change your zoning, could you achieve that? For that community character, yes. That's the basis for these. It's not a random number chosen as to what we want, or it's less policy. It's buildable lands. From that, you get categorized into these categories for the targets. So based on that and transit, we get lumped into high capacity transit category 1480 and 500, but that's based on our existing current land uses and available land and existing zoning. So that's why I call the 1480 and the 500 the natural rate of growth. It fits in the capacity. If it were to come, we've already analyzed in that buildable lands that the CIP and so forth, the infrastructure's there to accommodate it. And then we ask for that in the growth targets in the same room, call it horse trading, with all these other cities of the same thing. You add all those together, and as a group, it's supposed to perform in accordance with the regional growth strategy. And as a group, it does. But that horse trading allows you to look at community character and ask for a lower number. But based on buildable land. So it's kind of backwards, because the way us planners would love to do it is understand what's happening in Olympia and the Growth Management Act, then do the local policy of a comprehensive plan, then take a look at our buildable lands and the growth projections, then come up with growth targets that are representative of local control and community character. Our comment last round, and probably not this round because it didn't prevail, is the timelines are backwards. It's awkward. How do you know the end result as you're working on these upper level policies? You don't. But the assurance they gave us is it's workable, the bus is going down the road, and it's based on your individual buildable land study. It's not based on policy of what we could be or what's happening in Bellevue. It's based on what has happened in Newcastle since they started building structures. It's baked into the zoning map. But it all starts with that buildable lands. That's how you get these numbers of 1480. In that room of horse trading, you have all the planning directors I don't know if you ever played Indian poker. Or you put a card on your head and you can't see it, but you bet. You don't show your card, or you show your card, but you're afraid to because you have to perform as a group. The 29942 is baked into the regional growth strategy. All of you playing Indian poker, it needs to sum to 29,000. As a group, you're in conformance with the regional growth strategy of Vision 2050 and the countywide planning policies. But you show your card too soon and you say, we'll take 0. The other cities go, whoa, you're not taking your share. We're not taking all your housing for you. So, but the individual cities look at their zoning map, their community character, and say, what could work for this community? From what I've seen, and I was in a different category, non-contiguous. We're at the end of growth, and we didn't say 0, but we didn't say a lot. What I see from these numbers is that traditional growth rate captured by the former director, and it's the natural occurring infill based on how jobs and housing have formed in this city over time.
Wait, you mentioned we have a buildable land study, is that right, Mark? Where? Can I see it? It's funny, Aaron, who just put the map up? Somebody just put the map up, because when I heard Mark say buildable land study, I was wondering what, presumably somewhere on this map we're all looking at on the screen right now, is somewhere in there is the buildable land, right? And there was a study performed to figure out where we could build new housing, or?
For Newcastle is based on this picture. The methodology is in RCW, and it's as complicated as you can get. It exists, it's accurate, but it's based on this. It's based on houses on the ground. It's based on, to some extent, factors like critical areas. If half your city was a swamp, for instance, that buildable lands capacity report would reflect that. That comes from the planners, is required by GMA. Our gripe is it's just very early in the process. We fulfilled that. We're past that. It exists and it's available. And there will be other rounds. In another 8 years or 6 years, you'll do another one. We could locate it and post it.
Yeah, and that was actually done before my time as senior planner. That was Vandaway did it, but yeah, planner Vandaway did it. Yeah.
By the way, your slides are way better than Vandaway's ever were. Nice work.
So I guess kind of consistent with the discussion and the number of additional residences that are the target and jobs, it seems to me that it's pretty clear that we're looking at, as we plan for higher density housing and finding areas where we feel like that's appropriate and seeing how we can support the House Bill 1220, excuse me, or hope I'm citing that right, yeah, 1220. As we're talking about planning and accommodating the language in the statute, I guess when we come back and we talk about transit as part of our comp plan, it seems to me that that is a really important component of this, and the two really need to be considered together in my mind. We don't have an L train here. If we want to think about how do we really kind of support that, the policy behind 1220, I think it's not just saying you're putting up a bunch of units that people can live in and they're going to be more affordable. It's got to be how does that accommodate their lives? And I don't think that where we are here in Newcastle, you can really address that unless you address the fact that a lot of people who are lower income are going to be relying on mass transit. And at least my perspective is, if we think we want to put a lot of units in the areas that at least I personally think makes sense, we're going to need to improve mass transit support of those people who are going to live in those. I think it goes back to what Chair Gadzik was saying earlier about there's a certain lifestyle in that community that relies on those types of services. So that's just my 2 cents worth. As we move deeper into that discussion, I'd really like to connect the two.
I agree with that. When I hear the premise of the bill that was passed and think about other cities that would maybe have their transit near their downtown. Right now, that's not what we're seeing for Newcastle. This rapid transit is near the highway. Our downtown is not close to that. So do we have the opportunity to get a beefy update on transit, on understanding, does King County have a plan to help our downtown area get places? Or is that not really a topic that comes to mind looking at this map and hearing about this?
For policy, it does. I'll leave my personal opinions of Metro out of this, but for policy, it's absolutely linked. And so while you're looking at the housing element, you're looking at the other elements. Transportation, everything gets updated, it's all related. You don't want to put housing where it makes no sense for your transportation element. So it's fair game for that. Policies need to be internally consistent. They need to be consistent with the countywide planning policies. They need to be consistent with Vision 2050. And at the upper level, they need to be consistent with the regulations of Olympia. You will do that. Now, where it derailed quickly, service provision through any agency is a long-term thing based on very scarce dollars. So a conversation about getting transit in any particular place is long-term and difficult. So, but make sure that the Newcastle policies as they relate to land use and transportation are absolutely covered and make sense, are cohesive. But what comes out of it are action items. Some action items I've seen in Snoqualmie are you send 2 buses this way and you're constantly cutting services. That's not service to our community. Why are we sending all our tax dollars westward and we're getting nothing in return? And so it's a local conversation in regard to service, and Newcastle will have that conversation in due time.
Thank you also, it's like Aaron's reading my mind. I wanted to see a map, boom, there was a map. I wanted to see this 2035 plan, and there was that. Another thing I've heard quite a bit is speeding, especially when you go down that really, really steep hill to where that bubble is. Those people fly down that road, right? And also it's right next to Risden and Hazelwood. And what they've done now, and you can't drive past Risden and Hazelwood beyond like 5 miles per hour without getting a ticket. They've done a great job of slowing it down. People are definitely trained to slow down around the schools. So as we expand and bring in more folks, you can go back to that prior slide, please, with the 2035 comp plan. What about the fire and police part of as we grow and mature, and try to figure that part? Is that part of like utilities? Is that where the fire department, police department is, or how does that play into our comp plan?
Service provision, service levels. Yeah, all these are related. So the first level is that not only does each element need to be looked at, and it's not a grab bag wish list. They need to be internally consistent. So you would not, for instance, jack up the housing, put policies in there, turning this into a very urban type and character, but then turn around in your capital facilities and so forth and utilities and cut everything. And you don't have an aerial ladder, for instance. That internal consistency has to be reflected in all these elements.
Would one of these one of these 7 categories contain the fire and police part, or where would that be in there? Where like a land use, housing, transportation, utilities, economic development, parks and trails and recreation, capital facilities, where would police and fire fall into those? Does it need to be added as a priority? Because I know in talking with people, as we're supposed to be doing as commissioners, and as I just do naturally, you hear what people care about. And people care about speeding, that's a big one. That's a big one in Newcastle. Man, oh man, they fly around the neighborhood. It drives me nuts. We put in speed bumps and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just telling you, the best way to do it is just put a police officer right next to Hazelwood, and by God, people slow down. So, next to Brian's house, actually. You know it very well, I'm sure. They probably stopped by your house so where would that fall under the comp plan categories, police and fire?
The short answer is, since we have not analyzed the existing comprehensive plan, public safety, projects like that and that issue should be captured wherever they apply. You don't want everything in every element redundant, and you end up with a 300-page document nobody reads. So as we go forward, analyze what's in there already. If it's missing and needs to be added, we will have that conversation. Capital facilities, for instance, seems to, at this level, pop out where you put roads, infrastructure type issues.
What I'm proposing is it's missing. I'm not seeing it, and I think it's important. In fact, I know it's important just based on the feedback I'm hearing, is that public safety and fire department, police department, and all that kind of stuff, it's something that our residents care deeply about, is particularly the speeding issue. And if we're going to add people to Newcastle, I love, by the way, one of the big reasons why the Quigg family, Mark, moved to Newcastle was the parks and trails. We love it. We're there all the weekends. We love using them. They're fabulous. And we have a parks and trails bullet point. I'm just wondering, do we need some kind of public safety bullet point?
Yes.
There we go. That's all I want to hear.
But as I understand it, the comprehensive plan is about land use planning. And it might just be that police and fire is something that is, while it's important, it's not really land use planning. It's about what happens after the land use planning. So it may not be part of the comprehensive plan itself.
The policy should be, every decision in theory that the city and staff make from that adoption point onward should be based on the policies captured in the comprehensive plan. That's the purpose of it. It's most often used for land use, zoning and so forth, but the other elements are equally important. Public safety, service provision. So it's not the decision to hire one more police officer or to change the speed limit on a road or add a speed bump, but it sets the vision, mission, objectives, and policy that make those decisions possible later on a rational basis. So that you're not incrementally doing a million decisions based on what you're facing that night and your mood. It's based on the policies captured in the comprehensive plan, and it's the safe basis that a city can rely on for public safety, risk management, community character, safe routes to school. Capture the policy in the applicable element. It could blend into various elements. Transportation might be the primary location, but as it relates to housing and the location of housing or the character of housing, you could have a reference or that specific policy in the housing element, but definitely capture it at the policy level. So if you have a public event and the comments come in, safety is an issue, they're speeding on 119th, et cetera, capture the comment. We can work with you on potential policies and where they would go and test them with you to see that we fully capture them. Then they're in the adopted comprehensive plan. Then in theory, the 2 million questions and decisions over the next 20 years are based on the policy in this binder.
Dr. Hoffman or Senior Planner Fitzgibbons, do you have any concluding comments?
Well, I would just say this has been a really great conversation. Thank you for the questions and suggestions and homework that I'll be doing. So I just want to thank you all.
To circle back, what can we do next? We have a variety of things coming. We have the scope, we have the timeline. We've talked about it in general. We'll have a contract with a consultant. We will begin that process primarily based on stakeholder interviews and outreach. And then that'll proceed. A parallel conversation can be had with you. So if you want specific discussion with or without the consultant about House Bill 1110 or 1220 or what plan for an accommodate means, we have that opportunity. We don't want to waste time, but we want to take advantage of any opportunity to discuss this with you and move forward. So that's present. What I've heard tonight is, without going into, I don't know, I've been here 7 years. I still don't understand the detail of buildable lands, growth targets. I know how to work with them. I'll never be able to relate to you this subject expertly, but what we certainly can do is make it known what they're for, why they're important, and where are they, and get those in your hands so that we could start answering your questions. So I'll start with that as a deliverable. King County countywide planning policies are adopted from time to time. They are known. They consist generally of that buildable lands report for this area. The next one is the growth targets for this area, and we've talked a lot about that tonight. The third part is the text, which most people are familiar with. You go and it reads almost entirely the same style as what's in the comprehensive plan. But it's important to know it's those three elements. So what we'll do as a deliverable is get those to you so that they're less of a mystery. What I hope is not to sideline this 2 years into a conversation about the detail of the buildable lands or capacity. It would never end.
Excellent presentation. Thanks for the briefing. I personally feel a lot better informed because of it, so thanks for the effort you put into it. I'll now open our second public comment period. Is there anyone online that has joined us since we had the first one?
There is not.
No, then I will close the public comment period. Our next meeting, planning calendar, is February 22nd. Anything else to note on the planning calendar? I guess I'll ask that of anybody on commission or the staff.
Just really quick, Aaron and Mark, you're amazing. You easily deserved your promotion, Aaron. Congratulations. And Mark, I miss Steve, love Steve, but holy cow, you know your stuff. So thank you.
If I could follow that with one slide, I think the best slide for me was the smiley face Post-it notes and we talk a lot, right? And I always like to put it back on you. This is your comprehensive plan. You live here, you work here, you're appointed. This is your plan. We're here to help. This cannot be a staff plan. That slide is very important because we're learning at the same time. We know the concepts, we've worked with them, but we're generalists. And so it's important that whatever you need to drill down on in your conversation, let us know. We can easily obtain it, learn with you, provide it. We don't have the answers, but we know where to try and go get them. Thank you.
I think some of those smiley faces may have been computer generated, I'm just going to say.
Mm-hmm. You mean they're not naturally smiley? All right, well, before we adjourn, let me just draw your attention to a handout. I think everybody has got this in front of you. Every commissioner in a housing crisis, can an ugly building be beautiful? No? Did I just get that?
I read it.
Oh, okay.
You sent it to us in an email.
Oh, okay, I didn't see the email, so I thought maybe it was just hard copy delivery.
So, yes, we did send, we sent the link to the article out to all commissioners. But if you weren't, checking your email today when we sent it, you might not have seen it. And one copy was printed, and if you'd like me to make some more copies of that, I'm happy to do so, but.
No, when I saw the hard copy, since I didn't see the email, I thought this was going to be the method of distribution. So I asked that it be distributed to you for our design conversation later in the year. This article, if you haven't seen it already, talks about how in many cities there has come to be a very dominant style of architecture or design for multifamily housing, this modernistic style of housing that is very similar and cookie cutter. And it talks about the challenge faced with creating design standards. So I thought you'd find it interesting reading for when we start having this conversation later. All right, we will consider this meeting adjourned. Thank you all.